of Management Studies IGNOU presents an audiobook on the course Mmpc 016 International Business Management for MBA program. Presenting Block 2 International Trade, Unit 5 WTO Agreements.
Objectives. After reading this unit, you should be able to 1. Briefly discuss the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade (GATT). 2. Explain the structure of World Trade Organization. 3. Discuss the key agreements of WTO. 4. Explain the Trade Policy Review Mechanism. And 5. Understand India's experience under WTO trade regime. Introduction. The General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade (GATT) was a multilateral treaty that laid down agreed rules for conducting international trade. It came into force in January 1948. Its basic aim was to liberalize trade, and for 47 years, it had been concerned with negotiating the reduction of trade barriers and maintaining international trade relations. Overseeing the application of its rules was an important and continuing part of its activities. GATT also provided a forum in which countries could discuss and overcome their trade problems and negotiate to enlarge international trading opportunities. The rapid and uninterrupted growth in the volume of international trade till 1994 is attributed to and is taken as an indicator of the success of the GATT. The WTO was established on January 1, 1995. WTO is a successor of the GATT Uruguay round. 76 governments became member of the WTO on its first day. As on December 2021, there were 64 members of the WTO, and it represents almost 98% of world trade. Over 20 countries have an observer status and are in process of joining the WTO. WTO is an intergovernmental organization and it is based in Geneva, Switzerland. The key functions of WTO are 1. Administering and implementing the multilateral and plurilateral trade agreements which together make up the WTO. 2. Acting as a forum for multilateral trade negotiations. 3. Seeking to resolve trade disputes. 4. Overseeing national trade policies. And 5. Cooperating with other international institutions involved in global policy making. Structure of WTO. Let us now discuss the organizational structure of WTO for understanding the system of governance under WTO. As discussed above, World Trade Organization came into existence on January 1, 1995, after replacing the previous GATT. Now, WTO Secretariat is fully responsible for administering the international trade regime among member countries. Following are some of the important organs of WTO organization structure and are explained as under. 1. The Ministerial Conference. It is the supreme body involving the trade ministers from all member countries. All trade negotiations are concluded and agreed at Ministerial Conference only. It is also the apex governing body of the WTO that is responsible for setting the strategic direction of the organization for trade negotiations, rule setting, and concluding agreements. All final decisions relating to various aspects of trade agreements are taken here. The Ministerial Conference must meet at least once every 2 years. However, meeting can be called earlier also, depending on urgency and needs of member countries. In majority of the cases, the decisions are taken on the basis of consensus, but voting can take place on certain issues as it is difficult sometimes to reach to consensus on the trade body comprising 164 member countries having diverse economic interest and priorities. 2. The General Council. General Council is composed of senior country representatives who are usually at the level of ambassador from all members' country. General Council is the most important organ of WTO as it is responsible for overseeing the day-to-day business and management of the WTO. General Council meetings take place usually at WTO headquarters in Geneva, but Sometimes retreat meetings take place to discuss the subject matter informally. Practically, it is the key decision-making arm of the WTO for most trade negotiations and other issues. All other bodies except ministers, ministerial conference, report their business directly to the General Council. 3. The Trade Policy Review Body. TPRB consists of all the WTO members and is responsible for looking after the trade policy review mechanism as agreed in Uruguay round of trade negotiations. It has the mandate to periodically review the trade policies and practices of all member states. Trade policy review reports are important in this sense that it indicates how member countries are implementing their obligations and commitments made under various trade agreements. It aims at improving the adherence of member countries for commitments and obligations agreed under agreements of WTO. 4. The Dispute Settlement Body. This body comprises of all 164 member countries of WTO. It is responsible for looking after the implementation and effectiveness of the dispute resolution process for all WTO agreements, including the issues relating to implementation of the decisions on WTO disputes. Trade disputes of member countries are heard and ruled on by dispute resolution, which are carefully chosen individually for each case. In case of grievance, member country can go to permanent appellate body that was established in 1994. The decisions made by dispute settlement body are mandatory and binding on all members and should be accepted in letter and spirit by member countries. 5. The Councils on Trade in Goods and Trade in Services. It operates under the mandate of the General Council and consists of all members' country. It is tasked to oversee the details of the general and specific agreements on trade in goods and services. For example, it is mandated to oversee the implementation of agreements on textiles and agriculture, which are extremely vital to member countries due to higher export intensity of textile industry and employment generation. Council on Trade in Goods and Services is also mandated to look after the progress on agreement on trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights. 6. The Secretariat. The Secretariat of WTO is based at Geneva and is headed by the Director General. There are staffs of over 600 employees in the Secretariat, which comprises the legal expert, economist, trade analysts, and counselors and communication experts. Secretariat is responsible for all administrative functions aimed at smoothly and systematically running the organization. Although the Secretariat has no legal decision-making powers, but it provides vital services for taking the negotiations agenda forward. Principles of WTO. The formation of WTO has come on certain principles which were agreed among member countries during various stages of trade negotiations in different rounds of GATT. As WTO agreements are lengthy and complex, involving legal text and covering a wide range of interrelated and interconnected activities having far-reaching impact from one to another. It becomes tough sometimes to understand that where the source of problem or solution itself lies may become a problem due to such interrelated activities. There are a number of simple and fundamental principles which helps us understand the guiding tenets through which these WTO agreements are negotiated and implemented. These principles are the foundation of the multilateral trading system and are briefed as A. Non-discrimination. Most important principle of WTO, which states that no country should discriminate between its trading partners and it should also not discriminate between its own and foreign products, services or nationals. B. More open. WTO functioning is based on the principle of more open manners. This lowering trade barriers is one of the most obvious ways of achieving economic globalization among member countries. Trade openness encourages trade by reducing the customs duties or tariffs and non-tariff measures like import bans or quotas or SPS or TBT. C. Predictable and transparent. WTO rules ensures predictable and transparent trade regime among member countries. Foreign companies, investors, and governments, when trading with other countries or making an investment decision in another country, can be confident that trade barriers should not be raised arbitrarily by host countries. Thus, WTO rules bring more stability and predictability in trading and investment regime among member countries, encouraging foreign investor, companies and governments to invest more, trade more. These have spillover effect in the market and help create jobs, increased market consumption and higher growth in GDP of the country. D. More competitive. WTO rules discourages unfair, unlawful, and restrictive trade practices such as quota regime, export subsidies, and dumping of products at below cost to gain market share in target country. WTO rules and procedures lay down clear-cut rules defining what is fair and what is unfair and pass its verdict which the member country should obey. E. Protect the environment. Degrading environment is a major concern before our society, and WTO's agreements and rules has provision that member countries can take necessary steps to protect not only the environment but also public health, animal health, and plant health. As WTO preaches non-discrimination, these measures must be applied in the same way to both national and foreign business. No country shall be allowed to use environmental protection measures as means of disguising protectionist policies to control imports or provide protection to domestic industry. Framework Agreements of WTO. Let us now focus on understanding the various agreements of WTO shaping the global trade order. The framework agreements are the guiding pillars for understanding the basic structure of the WTO agreements. There are three main areas, that is, goods, services, and intellectual property, but have several agreements under them. For example, there are several agreements falling under the framework agreements on goods, the guiding principles for which are originating from GATT agreement. The comprehensive framework of WTO agreements can be understood in the broad pillars such as the umbrella WTO agreements on goods, services, intellectual property, dispute settlements, and trade policy reviews. Key agreements of WTO. Let us now understand the key agreements of WTO and their implications. 1. Agreement on tariffs. It is one of the foremost agreements of WTO. The agreement on tariffs is aimed at bringing more bindings and closer to zero, that is, reducing the tariffs and bringing them to a level where they remain to be used for the purpose of revenue and should not act in trade distortion. Agreement on tariffs is one of the bulkiest documents of Uruguay round of trade negotiations and is estimated to be of around 22,500 pages, listing individual countries' commitments on specific categories of goods and services. The agreement includes the commitments to cut and bind the customs duty rates on import of goods of member countries. In some cases, tariffs are being cut to zero. The agreement explains the following concept on tariffs. A. Most favored nation tariff. MFN tariffs refers to tariff rate that each member states of WTO will apply on imports from other members of the WTO unless the country is part of a preferential trade agreement. In other words, the MFN rates are the highest or the most restrictive tariff rates that WTO members charge one another. B. Preferential tariffs. Preferential tariffs are the lower tariff commitments made by member state of a preferential trade agreement that each member state will apply. They are always lower than MFN duties. C. Bound tariffs. Bound tariffs refers to the specific commitments which are made by the individual WTO member governments to WTO that bound tariff will be the maximum MFN tariff level for a given commodity line which it can apply. D. Applied tariff. Applied tariffs refers to the tariff rates which are actually applied on imports of a particular item or goods. 2. Agreement on agriculture. The Agreement on Agriculture of WTO is aimed to reform agricultural trade and frame the policies that are more market-oriented. The underlying objectives of WTO Agreement of Agriculture are to improve predictability and security for importing and exporting countries, thus creating a fair market system. The Agreement on Agriculture has following rules and commitments to apply. A. Market access. Aimed at various trade restrictions, confronting imports in letter and spirit of inherent principles of GATT. B. Domestic support, aimed at reducing and finally eliminating the market-distorting subsidies and other programs, including those that raise or guarantee farm gate prices and farmers' incomes. C. Export subsidies, aimed at restricting the export subsidies and other methods used to make exports artificially competitive. The Agreement on Agriculture has certain provisions that allow the governments to support their rural economies. It, however, asks for a policy regime which is facilitative to farmers but should not lead to distortion in trade of agricultural products. The outcome is that subsidies can be for ensuring subsistence farming, etc., but should not lead to price distortion in the international markets. This agreement has challenges for a developing country like India, where majority of livelihood are based on agriculture. If Government of India reduces or cut the subsidies, it will result in several socio-economic issues. Some provisions of this agreement are vague as they fail to address the issue of huge agricultural subsidies offered by developed countries to their farmers. 3. General Agreement on Trade in Services. The General Agreement on Trade in Services (GATS) is one of the most comprehensive and multilateral framework governing the international trade in services. Services constitute the ever-growing share in sectoral contribution of developed as well as developing countries. It was first negotiated under the Uruguay Round and is framed to address the huge growth of the services economy in the world. Trade in services is indeed an opportunity for world economy, as services trade can be leveraged as a catalyzing force for expanding the global trade, growth, employment, and other associated opportunities. The General Trade Agreement on Trade in Services has 3 elements which inter-ally are: first, the main text containing general obligations and disciplines; the second relates to annexes dealing with rules for specific sectors, for instance, air services, maritime services, and information technology services. Third and final is the framework of individual countries' specific commitments to provide access to their markets. It further includes the indication of services where the member states are temporarily not applying the most favored nation principle of non-discrimination. In the context of above, the member countries of WTO have negotiated and drafted the General Agreement on Trade in Services, which is aimed at harmonization of trade rules governing the exports and imports of services. 4. Agreement on Trade-related Intellectual Property Measures. The Framework Agreement on Intellectual Property is aimed at protection and enforcement of mutually accepted rules of WTO. Trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights, TRIPS, measures were negotiated initially under the Uruguay round of table negotiations. The Framework Agreement of TRIPS specifies the following types of intellectual property: A. Copyright and related rights; B. Trademarks including service marks; C. Geographical indications; D. Industrial designs; E. Patents; F. Layout designs of integrated circuits; G. Undisclosed information including trade secrets. Agreement on Trade-related Intellectual Property Measures broadly covers 5 broad areas, and these are: A. The manner under which the basic principles of the trading system and other international intellectual property agreements should be applied among member states. B. Describes the manner under which an adequate protection is given to the intellectual property rights in world trade. C. Explains the procedure how member states should enforce those rights adequately in their own territories. D. Details the mechanism to settle the disputes, if any, on intellectual property between members of the WTO. E. Provide the details on the special and transitional arrangements during the period when the new system is being introduced. 5. Agreement on Anti-Dumping, Subsidies and Safeguards and Contingencies. The revenue generated from tariff applied on imported and exportable goods is vital to sustainable revenue receipt of any states. Accordingly, a tariff regime is placed which allows the nation states to apply binding tariffs, and these are applied equally to all trading partners under the guiding principles of most favored nation treatment of WTO. The Framework Agreement on Tariffs, however, allows certain exceptions in some circumstances. These include A. Actions taken by member state against the dumping of goods, that is, selling goods at an unfairly low price. B. Subsidies and special countervailing duties to offset the subsidies as these are justified considering the fair play between domestic and external market players. And C. Finally, the emergency measures to limit imports temporarily. These are designed to safeguard the domestic industries. 6. Framework Agreement on Non-Tariff Measures. Non-tariff barriers are policy instruments aimed at restricting imports into a country. While tariff measures bring revenue to government, makes imported goods expensive and priced out vis-a-vis domestic goods, provide protection to domestic industry, discourage imports, non-tariff barriers on the other hand, restrict imports meaning that goods are not allowed to be import cleared. A standardized classification of the non-tariff measures (NTM) was discussed and agreed upon by several international organizations in the context of the Multi-Agency Support Team (MAST) appointed by the Secretary General of UNCTAD. Multi-Agency Support Team involving the group of eminent scholars in consultation with various international trade organizations and other associated stakeholders in EXIM value chain drafted a list of various trade measures that can act as barriers to international trade. The Framework Agreement on Non-Tariff Barriers deals with the following key issues: A. Import licensing. B. Rules for the valuation of goods at customs. C. Pre-shipment inspection, further checks on imports. D. Rules of origin. E. Investment measures. 7. Plurilateral Agreement. In addition to the multilateral agreements, there are 4 plurilateral agreements as negotiated originally under the Tokyo Round, but remained the part of Uruguay Round and subsequently of WTO framework agreements. The 4 are A. Trade in civil aircraft. B. Government procurement. C. Dairy products. D. Bovine meat. The bovine meat and dairy agreements were terminated in 1997. Evolving trade regime on standards and safety. With the growing world trade and imports of foreign goods, there is concern for health and safety issues among the consumers, and Article 20 of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade have regulatory framework in place to deal with it. It allows governments to act on trade issues in order to protect human, animal, or plant life or health, provided they do not discriminate or use this as disguised protectionism. For instance, Para 2.03 of India's foreign trade policy has provisions to protect public order, health and safety by mandatorily implementing Indian standards on all imported goods. Furthermore, there are 2 specific WTO agreements dealing with food safety and animal and plant health and safety, and with product standards in general. These agreements try to identify the mechanism and methods on how to apply standards, including dealing with any issue of protectionism arising out of such standards. Evolving trade issues at WTO. Let us now understand some evolving issues that are addressed under the multilateral trade system of WTO and are beyond the scope of specific trade agreements. These issues primarily are arising from the framework agreements of WTO, that is, GATT Agreement, GATS Agreement, and TRIPS Agreement. 1. Regional trade agreements. They have increased in numbers as well as the complexity in their formation due to ever-increasing proliferation of such grouping involving member countries from different parts of the world. More so, the kinds of issue being covered under the regional trade agreement has resulted in ever-increasing complexity, for instance, standards, competition policy, government procurement, subsidies, intellectual property, etc. The newer and emerging concerns from such regional trade agreements are addressed in various working committees of the WTO. 2. Trade and environment. Climate change has emerged a new challenge that the entire mankind is facing. The environment issues are now increasingly linked with trade issues, and the most frequently questions asked by the WTO members and also in various working committees group in concern related to climate change and environment arising out of trade issues. 3. Trade facilitation and investment related issues. Singapore Ministerial Conference has decided to set up 3 new working groups. The first on trade and investment, second on competition policy, and the third on transparency in government procurement. These issues were earlier never discussed in trade parleys, and these are aimed at identifying the possible ways of simplifying trade procedures around these 3 areas. It is subsequently referred as the Trade Facilitation Agreement. The Framework Agreement on Trade Facilitation, as agreed in Hong Kong Ministerial, is a landmark agreement for simplifying the border procedure and other involved issues. 4. Trade and electronic commerce. Online trade and commerce is increasing at high speed, completely transforming the market landscape and involving channels of delivery. Electronic trade and commerce, broadly speaking, has redefined the methods of production, advertising, sales and distributions, as each business process is happening through telecommunications network. For instance, the books, music and videos are transmitted down telephone lines or through the internet, which requires a new set of global rules and regulations to deal with. 5. Trade and labor standards. The labor standards are another evolving area under WTO trade regime. Labor standards refer to the way the workers should be treated across the countries. It especially covers a wide array of issues such as use of child labor, role of women workers and their working conditions, issue of forced labor, workers' rights including right to organize trade unions, right to strike, etc. It further dealt with issues of minimum wages to workers and their health, safety and working hours. Trade Policy Review Mechanism. WTO is based on principles of transparency and non-discrimination. Accordingly, the policymakers of respective countries, as well as the globally engaged business firms, need to know how transparent and fair are the trade policies condition of the country they trade in. Each stakeholder in global trade is interested to know whether the regulations and policies shaping the operating business environment are fundamentally transparent. Trade Policy Review Mechanism of WTO helps understand about it. Procedurally, it is achieved in 2 ways. 1. The respective member states have to inform the WTO and fellow members of specific measures, policies, or laws through regular notifications. And 2. WTO Secretariat conducts regular review of individual countries' trade policies, which are known as the Trade Policy Reviews. With the creation of WTO in 1995 as the permanent body on issues related to world trade, the issues related to services and intellectual property are included in the ambit of Trade Policy Review. The key objectives of Trade Policy Review of a country are: 1. To increase the transparency and understanding of trade policies and practices of the member country through regular monitoring. 2. To strengthen and improve the quality of public and intergovernmental debate on the issues which require attention of member state on trade distorting policies. 3. To understand and comprehend the multilateral assessment of the effects of policies on the world trading system. The trade policy reviews are taken in cognizance of their wider economic and developmental needs of a member country. It further understands the underlying policy initiatives and socio-economic objectives and the external economic environment of the member country and its sustainable development requirements. The Trade Policy Review ensures discipline in global trade order among member countries and encourages member states to follow more closely the WTO rules and disciplines. The end outcome of Trade Policy Review is to ensure the commitments of member state towards transparency and non-discriminatory trade architecture. The frequency of the Trade Policy Review depends on the country's size. For instance, 1. The Trade Policy Review takes place once in every 2 years for 4 biggest traders: the European Union, the United States, Japan, and China. 2. The next 16 countries are reviewed every 4 years. India falls into this category. 3. The review for remaining countries takes place every 6 years, with the possibility of a longer interim period for the least developed countries. India's experience under WTO trade regime. India started economic reforms in 1991, thus transforming the entire business ecosystem of the country by unshackling it from the clutches of Inspector Raj and centrally planned model. The process of economic liberalization, privatization, and globalization provided India and its industry and service sector to come to terms of engaging with the external world. The technological transfers, foreign investment, and managerial know-how helped Indian business firms to produce and trade cost effectively. These reforms helped Indian industries and service sector to prepare for the process of globalization, which is shaped with the formation of WTO in 1995. India substantially increased its exports of manufactures and services relative to traditional commodity exports as newer sectors of the economy started growing and competing with the best in the world markets. The growth of service sector, especially that of information technology, has established India among the top 10 players in global service exports. Liberal investment regime provided India a required cushion with ever-increasing foreign exchange reserves which have been possible under the predictable trade regime of WTO. The opening of trade and investment led to plethora of economic opportunities and has been an important element in the economic success of India, where the average import tariff has fallen from as high as 100% in some sector to mere 7.5% for majority of national tariffs in the last 30 years. Although the series of PTAs and FTAs signed by India have provided mixed economic results, external economic reforms were not supplemented with internal economic reforms, especially in the manufacturing sector. The potential gains from eliminating remaining trade barriers have considerable economic gains for India under the WTO trade regime. It, however, cannot make an economic success similar to that of other economies, especially China and other Southeast Asian economies. There is need to boost the competitiveness of domestic sector, and it requires a series of domestic reforms both at central and state levels. India can gain even higher results at a global level if internal reforms are pursued with enthusiasm and good spirit. Overall, India has benefited under the global trade regime of WTO. Summary. The WTO set up in 1995 is the successor to the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade (GATT). It came into existence in 1948 with the objective of liberalization of trade. It also provided a forum to countries to discuss and overcome their trade problems and negotiate to enlarge international trading opportunities. 8 major trade negotiations took place under GATT auspices, but the Uruguay round was the most significant, which lasted for about 8 years and led to the culmination of WTO. Its main function is to ensure that trade flows as smoothly, predictably, and freely as possible. At the heart of the system, known as the multilateral trading system, all WTO's agreements are negotiated and signed by a large majority of the world's trading nations and ratified in their parliaments. These agreements are the legal ground rules for international trade. Essentially, they are contracts guaranteeing member countries important trade rights. They also bind governments to keep their trade policies within agreed limits to each country's benefit. WTO has over 164 members, accounting for over 98% of world trade. Decisions are made by the entire membership through consensus. The WTO's top-level decision-making body is the Ministerial Conference, which meets at least once in every 2 years. Under this, there is General Council, which meets several times in a year in the Geneva headquarters. The General Council also meets at the Trade Policy Review Body and the Dispute Settlement Body. At the next level, the Goods Council, Services Council and Intellectual Property (TRIPS) Council report to the General Council. Numerous specialized committees, working groups and working parties deal with the individual agreements and other areas such as the environment, development, membership applications and regional trade agreements. The WTO Secretariat, based in Geneva, has around 600 staff and is headed by a Director General. India's stand on WTO has evolved over the years. Like any developing nation, the outcome of the Uruguay round also was a setback for India. Aspects like TRIPS were most surprising and disappointment aspect for the developing countries in the Uruguay round, and India was taken by surprise by the reach of TRIPS agreement. One of the main ways that India can gain is through tariff cuts in the developing countries' DC market. To really gain from the Uruguay round, India will have to be an efficient producer of goods and services, since improved market access does not benefit India alone, but its competitors as well.
listening to the audiobook by the School of Management Studies IGNOU for MBA program. Course code Mmpc 016 International Business Management. Course Coordinator Professor G. Subayama. Voiceover by Renuka. Edited by Ashok Sharma. Program assisted by Tarannum Jahan and Jagbandhu Jana. Program produced by Dr. Manoj Kumar Singh. This program was brought to you by Electronic Media Production Center of Indira Gandhi National Open University.